Yo, hope you did something fun today. This video I have a mini comic for you guys. Feels like it has been a while since I made one, but I always have so many ideas for them that it's only a matter of time before I draw another one. This one's an interesting case too, cause when I originally had the story idea for it, I wanted to make it a full-length fleshed out thing, and I just didn't have the time for it, so the idea was left to forever gather dust. However, a few weeks back while at work, I got such a strong vibe for how I could turn that story into a very short, sweet thing, carrying all the vibes and hardly any of the workload, had the dialogue word for word in my head, and a clear image of the first 3 panels, so once home, I immediately sketched those out. And this week I picked that rough up, did the remaining panels and finished it up. Be warned, there's heavy themes in the latter half of the video, like a lot of bad stuff, and while I don't really go into detail, I still mention a few things multiple times, the main one being a character trying to get 6 feet under, which is implied in the R2, so if you're sensitive to that stuff, you might wanna skip this video. Otherwise, hope you have fun watching it getting drawn, while I tell you the setting and the story behind it. Hopefully y'all won't mind me providing the full context here, even if it will take a while to get to the spot relevant for this specific comic. Promise it will not only be helpful with this art, but all of my character arts, since all of them except for one, my tiger boy Zonran, have a version set in this setting, and it's the one I always draw. Thus the stuff is good to know for understanding my pieces and won't leave you confused when I talk about my OCs in the future. Okay, so in 2010 on DeviantArt, a Pokemon Genjika group called Pokemono was made. While it had its own unique map and places, the whole culture of it was based on Edo period Japan, with fantasy elements thrown in, and of course Pokemon. It was called the Sun Empire to reference this fact. It was a sandbox kind of group, with a lot of freedom for members to make up their own lore, as few things were set in stone and a lot of them were left vague. There were rules, of course, like for example, members were only allowed to make original characters from regular Pokemon, so no mythicals or legendaries. Those were reserved for mod characters who held equivalent rank in the lore. Back at the start, the land was divided into 7 areas, confusingly called villages. I don't know if back then there really was just 7 major villages, or if they were just called that while meaning much larger areas, but regardless, the term village remains to this day and holds the meaning of a region, basically. Each village had its own unique jobs locked to it, so if you wanted your character to have that profession, they had to reside in that area. When I joined, it was after the old villages were destroyed and reshaped into 3 new ones: Norvale, Scorched Mountain, and Gale Spring. A few years after that, my favorite one was added, Radiant Harbor. Honestly, it was a very cool place back then and stayed pretty cool for most of its lifespan. Though it didn't feel too great by the end before closing in 2021. Still had its moments, but had its rough patches too. The community was pretty incredible, and I met a lot of wonderful people there. I stumbled upon the group in 2015 and I was in love, though quite a coward, and only gathered up the courage to join in late 2016 with my first Pokemon Genjika character ever created, Takara, big buff Joltik lady. She's a treasure hunter from Norvale, or at least I think she was my very first crack at designing Pokemon Genjika. Who knows, who cares. I actually created her with a specific character already in the group in mind. I was hoping to interact with that person and that we could get into fun role-playing shenanigans, so I wanted her to mesh with that character in fun ways. Unfortunately for me, that person left the group shortly before I joined. RIP me. Not too long after, I made my Midnight Lycanroc boy, Tairan, a bar owner from Radiant Harbor and one of the 2 guys in this comic. He and Takara are cousins who low-key hate each other, cause back then all your app characters in the group had to be related. And for a long time I had just these 2, so in all events and any group activity, like earning points, I used them, which most of the time meant I drew them following the event's prompt. That's how I accumulated so much art of them, and why you guys don't see them a lot on the channel. Right now, I am on a mission to have all my kiddos have the same amount of art on Toy House, and since Takara has the most, she's the one setting the goal. Tairan is in 2nd place, so I don't draw them much right now, to not set that finish line further for the rest of my kiddos. Once I get there, I plan to try to keep it even from then onwards, so you'll see everyone around an equal amount. But until then, these guys are gonna be rare faces. I had some story plans for them, but I struggled putting them in motion, so their stories didn't really progress any while I was part of the group and their character didn't develop. However, they did meet other characters and start up meaningful relationships that could lead to such stuff in the future. Takara met Kaede, who became her lover after the group closed, Sumiko, with whom she was questing partners, and Miku, who's her best pal. Tairan met Kisuke, on who he had a huge crush that led to heartbreak, and a lot of kind of distant friends like Ten, Shigure, Shie, and Tsumugi, to name a few. I had lots of fun, and the group really helped me stay motivated to art. Certainly wouldn't have drawn as much or as consistently without it, especially in my later years in it. I actually completed 2 31-day art challenges in the group. I was thoroughly obsessed. In 2020, I finally put my plan into motion of putting my other beloved OCs that I created for various RPs and universes into the Pokemon setting, and I started with Aaron, making him a Pancham noble / scholar that was born in Radiant Harbor, but currently resided in Gale Spring to escape his parents. And even after the group closed, I continued with this, since I wanted to have all of my OCs in the same universe so they could interact with each other and have one same narrative. At the end of 2020, I had actually reached that goal, having given all of them a Pokemon design aside of Zonran, since I didn't like any of the Pokemon for him. None of them are close enough to Tiger for me. The Jete became a Noibat street performer and thief, and Kaita became a Bishop sketchy carpenter, both from Radiant Harbor. Bomabaku was made for the group, though I never got the chance to app him, and he's an ex-samurai now bounty hunter from Scorched Mountain, and thus to this day I'm drawing illustrations set in this setting. Even with the group closed, it's still my main playground. Back to the story. That year I also got promoted into a mod in the group, and that's how Sindri came to be, since all mods had to have a legendary OC, but some legendaries were banned, like my beloved and much wanted Yveltal. So I had to scramble to make someone I had zero wish to have, as I don't actually like any other legendaries besides Yveltal. And after a lot of agonizing and indecision, I took a Keb I had and turned him into a shiny Tapu Koko, who was then Radiant Harbor's guardian. And he's the other character from this comic, and this is where the story becomes relevant to the art, I promise. But before then, a small side note. If you've seen my other videos, you'll know I have an Yveltal OC anyway. And that's cause at around the same time I started working on the different projects for which I made him. And cause I loved him so much, I designed him to fit into the Pokemon world too. So even though he could never be canon, he was canon to my characters. And after the group closed, I could do whatever I wanted to the story anyways, so he's a foreigner that came to the Sun Empire, attracted by the last big event, and is wandering around the country. Now back to the story for real. I joined the mod team right as they were starting to prepare a plot event. Those were a very rare thing, but had a lot of hype, since they were supposed to push the group's story forward. The group's last one was before I had joined, so it had been a long time and the members always talked about how much they wanted one. So I was very excited and super nervous about it, trying to do my best to help create something good and memorable, even though I had no idea what I was doing, since I had never been a mod for a group before or even had any similar experiences to help me out here. The whole thing was real stressful, but man, it had a lot of positive reception, so I still remember it fondly. The story went that suddenly the Empire skies turned all dark purple, making day and night look almost identical. I wrote a piece of literature for all 3 of my app characters at the time, detailing their reactions to this change, and Tairan was the most stressed out, since he is a big nervous mess even on good days. The sky change was followed by raids on the villages by Eternamax, the hand-shaped form of Eternatus, causing a lot of destruction to the villages, and I reflected that the most in art pieces with Tairan I did back then, since he went and tried to help people after the attacks. They're still on my DeviantArt account if you wanna take a look. Most but not all of them are on my toy house too. He had a terrible time throughout the whole event. Boy's Head is always a pretty dark place, but all this disaster around him made it a lot worse. Especially since a few months prior he got a Dynamax ban from a meteorite and decided to sell it to finally settle his debts, only to regret it now, because that would have been a powerful asset to defend his family and his home village that now he didn't have. He felt like he made the wrong choice and was eating himself up about it. Plus, he volunteered as emotional support for others, even though he really shouldn't have because he just didn't have the mental capacity for it, but he couldn't abandon them either. His friend Ten was one of the people he lent his shoulder for, and boy was that not a nice conversation for him to go through, since Ten's also a big nervous guy by nature and cries a lot, stressing Tairan out and worrying him that he's doing a bad job at comforting the other. He really did just pile stress upon himself at every opportunity. And then his younger brother got kidnapped by the Circuitry Ultra Beasts. The Ultra Beasts were the ones behind the Eternatus attacks and were trying to take over the Sun Empire and did their own raiding in the second half of the event. This rattled Tairan really badly since he wasn't even there when it happened and only found out about it days later. Like badly enough that while before the thought of ending everything was at the back of his mind, now he was thinking about it all the time because he felt like nothing but a useless burden, a detriment to everyone around him. Unfortunately for him, that was also around the time his crush found a lover, thus breaking his heart without even knowing it. The poor pup was really going through it, plenty of it not even being by my own design. Things just worked out in that kind of funny way. Don't get me wrong, a lot of it was by my hand still. Tairan often gets the short stick amongst my characters. I'm just surprised people ended up accidentally adding to it too. The last drop was Takara. They've always had quite a volatile relationship, trying to play nice with each other for different reasons but often ending up in disagreements. After the whole Ultra Beast attack got wrapped up and peace came back to the Sun Empire, Takara went to visit Tairan in his bar and shared her stories from the event, which led to their biggest fight yet when Tairan realized how reckless she is with her own life and she got insulted by his doubts of her strength and insistence that she was less suited for these things. She tackled and punched him and stole his necklace, which was made by her mom, and she saw him as undeserving of it. He refused to fight her and threw her out of his bar, shouting for her to never come back, and after that broke down and decided to end his life. This is when this comic takes place. Sindri found him right before he was going to do it and was having none of it. Sindri had already a pretty bad time being the guardian of Radiant Harbor, since the village hadn't had a legendary in a long time and thus was rather abandoned and a mess. Sindri was working hard trying to change the negative perception it had. Having his people dying on him wasn't going to help that at all, so he was quite motivated to try and help Tairan once he figured out what Tairan was going to do, though not to imply that he wouldn't have helped otherwise. My little bird is always willing to extend his hand, especially for his villagers. So they ended up sitting on that cliff and talking some, both of them being pretty uncomfortable about the whole thing since, well, Tairan is a coward true and legendaries scare him on principle, so having his villagers one chatting him up would have always made for a bad day, and he couldn't have staged worse circumstances for their first meeting if he tried. While Sindri didn't really know what to do about this, the whole idea of taking your own life is kind of inconceivable to him, due to his own ideals and how he grew up, which made it hard for him to figure out a solution to Tairan's problem. What he determined in the end is that Tairan lacked purpose, so that's what he set out to do, to give him one in the form of a Litten. See, during the event, a lot of Pokemon went berserk, and plenty more got hurt due to this. Sindri had been helping with the efforts to aid them as much as the people, since a person he was very close to, Norwell's guardian Hisenki, cared for Pokemon a lot, and Sindri had been bringing the worst case ones to them, since they could talk to Pokemon and thus make the process of treating them and their recovery faster. A few days prior, Sindri found a newly born Litten, the only survivor from an attack on her family by Corviknights. He was going to bring her to Hisenki on his next trip to Norvale, but now decided to give her to Tairan instead. Tairan wasn't very thrilled about this responsibility being forced upon him. Despite loving animals and feeding strays every morning at the back of his house/bar, he has always avoided situations where he's put as a carer of any being, Genjika or Pokemon, because he doesn't trust himself with that responsibility, and is convinced he'll mess up and cause harm. However, his fear of that is outweighed by his fear for legendaries, and he wouldn't dare to say no to Sindri. So that day he comes back home with a Litten, promising to do his best to look after her until she no longer needs him. What's funny about the text in the comic is that it could be just as much of Sindri talking to the Litten as it is to Tairan, maybe aside of the losing her family line, but to be honest, his relationship with his family has been strained for a while. He was always the oddball in it, even if beloved, and stuff happened that especially distanced him from his father. Of course, the pronouns ensure that it's directed to Tairan, but in my head Sindri totally said the same thing to the Litten when flying back to Tairan to pass her. I won't lie and admit that this whole plot point, if you can call it that, was inspired by stories I've read on the internet, how animals have helped people in really bad spots. For example, giving treats to a cat at specific times the owner had to take medicine, so the cat kind of acted as an alarm for when to take them. Or people not being able to work up the effort to look after themselves for themselves, but they would do it to look after their pet. I don't know, just something about those stories really stuck with me and definitely inspired the development of Tairan ending up with a pet to motivate him to continue on. That said, this almost didn't happen, because years prior, for a prompt from an Inktober-like challenge in Pokémon, I designed ghost-type versions of Takara and Tairan, her a Haunter and him a Banette. And I absolutely adore Banette, such a good mon, one of my favorite megas if not the favorite, so I was quite enticed by the idea of him becoming one in the story. There's also an NPC I've been dying to introduce to his story, and this would have been a great way. She would have found him afterwards lost and confused without any of his memories and helped him get his bearings. It all would have been super cool and it was my preferred outcome because I couldn't come up with anything better for her. However, one thing that stopped me was the fact I already knew the group wasn't going to last much longer, so all that plot potential would have been lost since it didn't have much value without other people's involvement, without all the characters that knew Tairan as a Lycan rock. Thus, I went with the easier route of Sindri stopping him, keeping the status quo for the group's closing, and I'm still stuck on how to write my ghost gal in, but maybe someday I can figure out something just as neat. From here, it's canon that Sindri has paid a couple of visits to Tairan to see how he's doing, and all of them freaked Tairan out. He wasn't able to do more than that despite wanting to, cause Guardian, lots of work to do. The Lycan got really attached to Tairan, always following him from room to room, and her favorite spot is on his shoulders. He can pick her up and pet her as he likes most of the time, and he's the only one with that privilege. She darts away from anyone else, not above hissing and batting at them if they don't leave her alone. She likes her personal space, thank you very much. She's not keen about other people being around him either, which makes Tairan despair a little bit, cause now he can't really get rid of her. He can't throw her back to the wall, captivity grown she might struggle surviving, and he can't pass her on if she likes no one else. Eventually, he'll end up with another injured Catman on his hands that he was accidentally tricked into looking after, and from there he basically makes himself a reputation as the guy who adopts injured strays, and his collection of cats grows against his will. All because I find the idea incredibly amusing. I suppose at some point he should just give in and catch the strays he feeds every morning. He has basically adopted them already anyway. His head still remains a dark and bleak place, but at least he won't be an immediate danger to himself anytime soon. Not as far as my ideas for him go. I have no intentions of him getting any better than that though. If he ever does, it'll be through other people's efforts and RPs, cause I'm mean like that. And I'm mean like that cause I find it way less fulfilling doing these sort of plots on my own. Like, I really wish it could have been someone else's OC that took Tairan down and not Sindri, but oh well, that's how the cookie crumbles. I think that's all I have to share with you guys today, so let's head out to the showcase for the final look at this comic, yeah? The Lycan turned out pretty cute, no? I suppose I could have talked about the technical side of this comic, how I drew it and such, but I really didn't feel like it, sorry. The only actual interesting bit in my opinion is why I chose to not show the faces, and well, I don't have a good answer for that. It was just vibes I got for this. I feel the emotion is greater without seeing them. Aside of that, I think someday I'll make a dedicated video on how I approach comics, so for the sake of not repeating myself, I didn't include anything of that here. Hope you enjoyed the video anyway. Anyhow, thanks for watching, do done be fun, bye bye!